Welcome back to another episode of ADK Talks. I'm Jane, along with my co-host and brother Steve. Say hi, Steve.
Hello.
And we bring you the best of the Adirondacks, whether it's a place to stay, eat, shop, or something to experience. We are your guides to discovering the amazing things to do in New York State's 6 million acre Adirondack Park. You know, listener, on this podcast, we focus on all the incredible places and people in the Adirondacks. And we also think it's important to ensure that the park stays beautiful and continues to thrive for future generations. Today, we're joined by John Sheehan, who's been the voice of the Adirondack Council for decades. In a nutshell, the Adirondack Council is a strong advocate for clean air, clean water, and the preservation of this unique region. And as I think you'll discover in this episode, the council is doing some truly amazing things. So, John, welcome to ADK Talks. We're so glad you're here. Can you give our listeners, just a brief history of the Adirondack Council? What led to its founding? How has the mission evolved over time?
Sure. As you know, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. So back in 1975, we were essentially a group of people concerned about changes that were happening in the Adirondacks. The Adirondack Northway had been completed just recently, and that brought an awful lot of new changes to traffic patterns, potential for development, got people into the Adirondacks much more rapidly than they ever could before, and opened up a great deal of development potential on the interior where the economy had been pretty sleepy in the past. So the organization was founded essentially to try and keep track of what was going on and to make sure that the state didn't allow growth and development to overwhelm the natural beauty and health of the park. So essentially a group of organizations got together to form an organization of organizations. So we became a council of representatives from big groups like Sierra Club and Audubon Society, and smaller groups like the Hawkeye Conservationists up in Clinton County, and the Association for the Protection of the Adirondacks, which was a very old group at the time, but not very large. And all these groups got together, Natural Resources Defense Council, ADK, and pooled their resources to create an entity that could speak for the park in Albany and Washington. And the idea here essentially was to tap into the solutions and the funding that were available in a state that didn't always pay enough attention to rural areas because most of its population was centered in one very, very large city and 5 or 6 other pretty big cities that got most of the state's attention in terms of time and money. So in order to focus some of that attention on the Adirondacks, we felt there was a need for an organization that could understand the park very well, develop a plan to address its needs, and move that plan ahead as logically as possible. And from that became our plan for completion of the Adirondack Forest Preserve. The 2020 vision reports that we published in the 1980s really became the blueprint for the state's open space conservation plan and for the Environmental Protection Fund's priority list for acquisition of new lands and new capital projects inside the park and around New York State. And this is an important approach. I mean, we really need to protect this region. We are lucky to have inherited from our ancestors the largest collection of wilderness east of the Mississippi and north of the Florida Everglades. There's one federal wilderness bigger in Florida, but the Adirondacks really make up the bulk of the roadless, motorless forest that's located on the eastern United States. And almost all of the original never-cut ancient forests that still exist in the Northeast are in the Adirondacks as well. So we have quite a legacy of protected land and water that has resulted in an ecological gift to the future. But there are some holes in that gift. Part of that is that a lot of bad things happened in the 19th century, including wildfires that caused a great deal of damage to the forest preserve and overhunting of animal species that have disappeared from the park for long periods of time. We lost the beaver, the moose, the cougar, the wolf, a lot of species, and eventually, due to pollution, the bald eagle, each one of which has been partially returned to its or had its habitat restored to being intact at this point, but not all have actually returned to the park. We are seeing moose come back. Their viability long term remains in question because of climate change, but we have seen the bald eagle return after DDT was banned, and their numbers are now continuing to grow and strengthen throughout the region. And the beaver population was really an overhunting question as well. Now that we've left their habitat to them, in many cases we've seen a very robust return of that particular animal. And there are other such success stories, including brook trout now returning to the Adirondacks after decades of acid rain, but that's one we are in danger of going backwards on right now as a consequence of federal policy. So the park is so ecologically unique, mainly because it's in the transition zone between the hardwood forests of the Appalachian Mountain Range and the taiga, or boreal forests of Canada and subarctic regions. So the boreal forest is the last kind you see before the land turns to tundra as you move northward in latitude and upward in elevation. So it's the last type of forest you see on a mountaintop before the mountain turns to a rocky summit. And that is a type of forest that is really quite rare in the United States. There's not much of it outside of Canada and North America, but a big portion of that dip that comes down into the United States happens in the Adirondack Mountains. And that habitat connects Canada to the United States in a way that allows animals to move back and forth, wildlife to move in between those two biomes over time. And there are a lot of animals that live sort of on the fringe of both. So being that transition zone, we have a very broad mix of wildlife and plants in the Adirondacks that Appalachian regions don't have, and that boreal regions alone don't have. So having that existing both at high and low elevation inside the Adirondacks gives us a really unique mix of wildlife habitat that increases biological diversity and gives you a really awesome opportunity to view wildlife at its original habitat here in the Adirondacks as a casual hiker or recreationist in the park.
Thank you so much for that, because I heard the term boreal forest so many times and not really understood what it meant. So that's really interesting.
It's easy to tell, actually, visually, too. Essentially, what you'll see is a tree full of very pointy-topped trees. And that's generally because they're all spruce and fir trees. And the understory will be relatively mossy and wet in a boreal forest. So you'll see very large wetlands, lots of lakes, rivers that are connected to one another, and generally a very cool, wet forest floor. In the Appalachian region, you'd see more of a hardwood canopy with some pines and other conifers mixed in, but it would be deciduous, so that in about 7 or 8 months of the year, there are no leaves on it, and the sunlight is penetrating directly to the forest floor, and it changes entirely what can grow there, what can live there, what kind of wetlands remain year-round. So having that mix has been very good for the Adirondacks. It's one of the reasons that we are one of the few places in the United States that has a winter sports-oriented culture. You see lots of bobsleds and ski motif on people's homes and businesses around the park, and it really has made an impact on the region. And again, we are concerned that that is being threatened by a very rapidly warming climate.
Yeah.
And that the winters are getting shorter. It's less likely that a lake will stay frozen all the way across for very long in the Adirondacks anymore. And certainly the biggest of the water bodies are not freezing across all the way, making it difficult and kind of dangerous for people that enjoy ice fishing and snowmobiling and that sort of thing.
Can you talk a little bit about, you brought up climate change, certainly experienced wildfire smoke this summer from Canadian wildfires, industrial pollutants that come from outside the park, all have an effect. How do these external forces impact the region?
Well, one of our roles has been to be a liaison between the Adirondacks and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, which has most to do with controlling pollution between states. New York, back in 1984, became the first state in the Union to pass an acid rain law to control what our power plants were doing. Vermont followed suit very quickly, and then Minnesota, I think, was the third. But it took a great deal of time for other states in the Northeast to do the same thing that we did. And the Midwestern states essentially refused to cooperate in that particular cleanup effort. So we worked with the federal government, with Congress, to amend the Clean Air Act to make sure that the federal government put in place an acid rain program in 1990. And that program had the result of eliminating about 95% of the sulfur dioxide that was falling on the Adirondacks at the time. That was a huge reduction in pollution, about 10 million tons a year that was falling on the park from various directions. And you can see the results on the ground. It took only about 20 years for us to see a major improvement in the places that had not been so profoundly affected quite yet. And we're continuing to see improvement even in the worst hit places of the park. Although some of those are going to take a little more time than we had hoped to recover. But the trend has been good and basically been followed through upon by each of the presidential administrations that have been in power since 1990. But this one seems intent upon moving us backwards at the moment, both opening up opportunities for new coal plants to be built and removing the pollution restrictions on some of them as well. The announcement of essential deregulation of the power industry is very bad news for the Adirondacks. That's something that we had made enormous progress on over the past 25 years, 30 years, and the progress is evident in everything that's going on in the park right now. We're seeing brook trout in places where we thought we would never see them again because the lakes were dead. The brood stock that we assumed perished with everything else in the water wasn't going to be around to help rebuild those populations. And miraculously, in a couple of places, we found that enough fish survived in slightly more alkaline sections of streams away from the main body of water to perpetuate, for example, the Sagamore Lake brook trout, which we thought was extinct, but came back recently when the conditions improved enough in the main lake for it to live there again. And it is now thriving, but we are in danger of seeing that progress being reversed, I'm sorry to say. At the same time, we are seeing progress in what people can do with the fish that they catch. One of the most depressing things to me about working in the Adirondacks back in the 1990s and early 2000s was having an abundant number still of fish available to people who rely upon fishing for subsistence, but it was such a danger for them to eat them because they were so loaded with mercury and other heavy metals as a result of the industrial contamination that was taking place from air pollution. Over time, as the pollution goes away, that contamination subsides as well. And the health department has now removed a lot of the restrictions on non-predator fish, the fish that don't eat a huge number of other fish. So things that don't have giant teeth in their head generally. And a lot of species are now safe for all age groups and even for women of childbearing age to eat now. So that's big progress and something that really has an impact on quality of life for people at every level of income. And whether you're somebody that needs a couple of pounds of fish to help feed the family during any month of the year, or someone who simply really values a nice day out fishing as a form of recreation, this is a big step forward in your ability to do those things. So we're grateful that EPA made that progress and helped us achieve all those things. And we had all of the scientific evidence that we needed to show that this was necessary. And that continues to be something that we're focusing on here in the Adirondacks. As we know, we can't really predict what's going to happen politically. in terms of who will be in charge of what in the federal government or even state government. But we know that if we have the evidence to show that we can prove there are pollution problems taking place and show who is responsible for those problems, that we can get that addressed, whether it's through legislation, regulations at the federal level, or when those things fail, we occasionally as a state have to go to court and force the issue, essentially, use the law to help defend the Adirondack region. That too is becoming more challenging with changes in federal courts and how they respond to lawsuits being brought on interstate issues. But I think that the courts continue to be a remedy that we will need at our disposal to defend the region and to keep us healthy and away from the kind of damage that causes long-term issues for the population of the park. Heavy metals are a very serious contamination issue, something that, especially for children and for older people, can be really quite devastating. And having them involved in birth defects and organ damage is enough evidence for us to show that they need to be eliminated entirely from environmental exposure and protecting public health.
We could probably spend an entire podcast talking about this aspect of it, but you've brought up a couple of different things that you track and monitor. Overall, what tools and resources do you use to monitor water quality, air quality, et cetera, in the park?
There are a couple of programs in place that help us to interpret what data is being collected right now. The National Atmospheric Deposition Program is a nationwide not-for-profit organization that connects research universities to one another and to federal agencies. And together, they do a very good job of monitoring what's coming out of the sky and hitting the ground. And that program is supplemented by something called the Clean Air Status and Trends Network. And that is a program that was set up just in the Northeast as a result of the acid rain problem. And its job essentially is to monitor air pollution that can cause acid rain, smog, and soot pollution, and to report on that regularly to a central database that is then collected all in one place and mapped out so that people can go to the site and see what's falling on them. This is a very encouraging thing to look at over the last 20 years or so, as the maps went from dark red colors indicating lots of pollution to bright green indicating little or no pollution coming out of the sky. About 5 years ago, there was an attempt by Congress to remove the funding for that program. I'm happy to say that the then Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer managed to get that money put back into the budget, only to have the next year calls for others in Congress calling, essentially from the Midwest, calling for cuts to another program called the Long-Term Monitoring Program. And that is one that does a test of lake chemistry. So instead of just testing what's falling out of the air, they are testing the chemistry of what's actually in the water and determining how much of what is coming out of the sky is impacting that water. And by comparing the two sets of data, you get a very good sense of how long it takes air pollution to have a detrimental impact on the environment and on public health. Those in conjunction work to give us a pretty accurate picture of where pollution's coming from and where we have to focus pollution reduction efforts in order to protect the park long term. We have a very good sense now of where all of the pollution's coming from. There are continuous monitors on the smokestacks of power plants, and there is no longer any mystery. We, for a long time, had to cope with the Midwestern accusation that we didn't know what we were talking about, that they were too far away to be causing our acid rain problem. That how could they, hundreds of miles away from us, be responsible when they knew that they'd built their smokestacks tall enough, some well over 1,000 feet high. That's 100 stories.
Wow.
to get the smoke out of the neighborhood where the power plant was built. And once that happened, especially in places where the prevailing winds carry everything from southwest to northeast, you find that the Adirondacks are sort of in an atmospheric funnel in which the pollution coming from the Midwest tends to concentrate and flow straight over the top of the park. As it picks up moisture in the Great Lakes region, it gets heavy, and as it encounters the mountains in the Adirondacks, it tends to squeeze that moisture out of the clouds in the form of rain, snow, or even on a very dry day, fine dry particles. Those things accumulate and continue to fall in the park day after day after day. When pollution is heavy, you can see the toll that it takes, and it doesn't take very long for that to happen. And when the pollution is gone, you get a very good sense of how resilient nature is and how its ability to overcome pollution and stress is really amazing, but there are limits to that. And we are pressing up against some of those limits right now.
Yeah. John, this is usually the part in the podcast where Stephen asks me to ask you to give us your website. It's a great resource. There's so much information about all this stuff we're talking about. And if people want to dive deeper into it, what's your website address so people can go check it out?
It's just been redesigned, and it's AdirondacCouncil.org. It's got a lot of information on it. There are dozens and dozens of pages about conservation issues in the park and advocacy, and some tools for people to use to help identify problems in their own neighborhood or to pitch in when they see that there's something happening to the Adirondacks. We can always use help in terms of advocates who care about the park and are willing to send a letter or pick up the phone and make a phone call to a public official and ask them to do the right thing. One of our most important tools is our State of the Park report. And every year we review about 100 different important decisions that were made by public officials, whether they were elected or appointed officials at the local, state, and federal level. And we do essentially a digest of how those decisions were made and why and what the outcome was. And each year that comes out in the fall, and people are able to tell what's being done to help or hurt the place they love.
That's a great resource. That's wonderful.
It's very nonpartisan, too. We do our best not to involve electoral politics in this review. We are really taking a look at how people who are in office right now are doing the job of protecting the Adirondacks or not protecting the Adirondacks, and trying to focus on that as best we can. I think that becomes a valuable tool for voters to use as they make up their minds about who they want to support. But we don't ask people to support or not support any specific candidate. We will this year activate our political committee. However, we have an issues committee called the Committee to Defend Forever Wild, and there is a constitutional amendment that will be on the ballot in November that everyone will be asked to make a decision upon. In this case, it is an amendment to allow the Olympic Regional Development Authority to do some Olympic sports facility development on land that is currently forest preserve. And it would also legalize some things that they did previously that were not particularly legal on their property, and put them on a track of remaining in compliance with the Forever Wild clause in the future. This is a good solution from our perspective, and one that we'll ask people to support.
Let's shift gears a little bit, because one thing I know living here in the Adirondacks in the winter is the impact of road salt. How big of a problem is it, and what can be done about it?
First, let me just correct what I said a second ago. The election day is November 4th, not November 5th. But
okay.
Road salt has been an issue in the Adirondacks since the 1980s, only when it was really introduced to the park by the State Department of Transportation as their chief de-icing agent. And initially, it was considered to be much, much better than using sand because sand had caused problems in local streams where it was filling up gravel beds that are necessary for trout reproduction. And if it wasn't collected very rapidly after the winter ended, more and more was getting into local waterways. That by itself should have indicated that we needed to do something about the drainage, but ultimately a lot of time went by as we were starting to carefully monitor the impact of what salt was doing to certain places. Now, we had a concern about salt getting into lakes, and one of the first places that we noticed a potential problem was in Cascade Pass, which is the roadway that goes between Keene and Lake Placid. It's very steep and windy, and it is a very tricky place to keep free of ice and snow during the wintertime. Especially as it goes right along the edge of two lakes, it was an area of concern because whatever you put on the road is going to wind up in the water almost immediately. In those places, the lakes are literally just a few feet. It seems like inches from the edge of the road in that location. And 40 years ago, there was a beautiful white birch forest between the edge of the road and the lakes themselves that slowly died away as a result of the road salt being applied on that road. I have photographs from the 1980s of the trees in between on the shoulder that were shading that side of the highway that just don't exist anymore. And over time, those two lakes got a layer of salt in the bottom of them that initially didn't seem to have a huge impact on the quality of life for fish in the water in terms of their survival rates. But what was happening was that the salt is a heavier layer of water than the water that isn't salty. So because lakes stratify, you wind up with a layer of salt at the bottom of the lake that is the coldest, heaviest water that sits there. And in the spring and fall, generally, as temperatures change very rapidly and lots of precipitation occurs, those layers tend to fold over upon one another and mix together, and the water that was at the bottom of the lake in the summer and in the winter will mix to the top and get some oxygen into it and be renewed in terms of its ability to sustain fish life. Sadly, once the layer of salt gets there, it doesn't budge, even in the spring and fall. So you wind up with a layer of water at the bottom of the lake that doesn't have any oxygen in it over time. That means all the plants down there die, and any fish down there can't breathe. So it puts a dead zone in a lake and causes that lake essentially to stop functioning. If you stop putting the salt in, over time, the lake will return to its natural balance and begin to mix again. But it's important to recognize that that was happening, and we didn't realize that for probably the first 20 or 30 years that we were using road salt in the Adirondacks. Now, there are 11,000 lakes and ponds in the Adirondack Park and 30,000 miles of rivers, streams, and brooks. So there's a lot of water out there, and it's flowing in every direction away from the park all the time. But there is not enough flow to carry all of the salt away to somewhere else. And over time, it's been building up on the sides of the roads to the point where it is contaminating soil around people's houses and their drinking water wells, and has gotten into the groundwater. That is a significant issue. When Paul Smith's College and the Adirondack Watershed Institute were studying this problem initially and looking at it around Mirror Lake and Lake Placid, Watershed Institute was reporting back that they were saltier in the summer than they were in the springtime. Meant that the salt was not coming from runoff necessarily, it was coming from underground. Summertime stream flows are fed mainly by springs in the Adirondacks after the precipitation of the spring season has leveled off. So having them be salty in the summertime was a very bad sign for places that are going to remain salty for a very long time, unfortunately. Salt in the groundwater is something that doesn't readily fall out of solution. So it will stay salty for a long period. It will remain unhealthy for people to drink. And continually cause problems with their home appliances, washing machines, anything that uses water will corrode more quickly and start to develop rust issues that can have an impact on their function. As we see with roads and bridges, Paul, is a very effective corrosive device, and it will take things apart over time, and that's certainly happening. So there are great methods that have been developed over the last few years in the Adirondacks to avoid excessive road salt use. And it's really important that we get this started on the statewide level, because we're starting to see this happen in places where it is very, very expensive to fix, like the New York City watershed. Croton Reservoir is showing signs of being too salty already, and that is drinking water for hundreds of thousands of people. And if you can connect that into the New York City system, which it is part of right now, when you connect that, it puts at risk drinking water for millions and millions of people. So New York supply is largely unfiltered and untreated coming out of the Catskills, but it is going past roadways that are not protected by the Department of Environmental Protection's zoning plan in the Catskill Park, and especially those on the east side of the thruway are showing signs of salt contamination now. Now, by using brines and restricting the amount of salt that is applied, and by using atmospheric data to help determine where the most effective locations are to put de-icing materials, we can reduce what's going on to the ground by 70 or 80% in a lot of cases. And certainly statewide, that would save a huge amount of money and prevent an awful lot of water contamination that's happening right now.
The largest percentage of our listeners is from the New York metro area. So this is something that I think everyone should be really, really concerned about. As a former New Yorker myself, New York's drinking water is wonderful. It's often very highly rated, but you can see how quickly that can change. So I think it's great that this is a topic that you all are focused on.
I've lived in communities with bad water before, and
Yeah.
it is a nightmare to a homeowner. Even somebody renting, you have very few choices of how to get the contamination out. And if you're stuck buying water for drinking and other purposes, that gets to be a major expense in a person's life. Really one that's avoidable if your municipal system is better taken care of. One of the things we tried to accomplish this year was to get the state moving on the lessons that we've learned in the Adirondacks through the Randy Preston Road Salt Task Force. And this year we got very close. The Senate passed, but the Assembly did not get around to the legislation that would have created a task force to carry out the plans and pilot projects that we managed to pioneer here in the Adirondacks. So really, there is no, even with DOT's resources, there's no one agency capable of doing this on its own. We need some oversight to help DOT in some cases overcome its reticence to reduce road salt anywhere over concerns for public safety. But we have done the work necessary to show that these challenges can be met and overcome. I think that the time to get that done was last year or the year before, but we're going to have to settle for next year and hope that we get the legislature to do that.
That's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Let's shift gears again. I was fascinated when you and I talked last week about your support, or the Adirondack Council support, of the Timbuktu Institute that's being led by SUNY ESF. What is the Timbuktu Institute and what are they trying to do?
Well, this was an idea. We were looking around at the various means for students to gain the training and credentials necessary for a career in climate science, or as a forest ranger, or in any of the environmental advocacy fields that are out there. And what we found was that a lot of the pool of talent was limited to upstate folks who were exposed to DEC camps and programs as kids, or who were living next to a protected area, and not much interest being shown from large metropolitan areas of the state. Even though we knew, polling showed us that there was interest in the Adirondacks all over New York, it seemed to be more a matter of access or people having the right exposure to opportunity. And that's where we tried to improve things a little bit. The SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry has an excellent campus that it uses for both spring and fall and summer instruction. And the summertime program for years has brought kids from other small colleges to learn about the Adirondack, but most of those were upstate too. And this year we worked with some folks who were involved in the Adirondack Diversity Initiative, which the council had been a founding organization with them, and connected the Medgar Evers City University of New York campus with the SUNY ESF campus in Newcomb, so that high school age kids who were entering Medgar Evers in Brooklyn in the fall semester would get a chance to go to the Adirondacks for a couple of weeks in the summertime after an orientation at their school and spend some time actually in the park learning about what careers are available, what kinds of things they can learn here, what the park is all about. And we found that there is enormous interest in this. So it's been a breeze, really, after initially starting to get people aware of this program to recruit kids into it. And I know that the visit by the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Caucus of the New York State Legislature helped to prompt some of this discussion. And I think it's helped to connect people back to the park who might have lost a family connection along the way sometime in the past, and has brought people to better appreciate the Adirondacks as both a place of recreation and renewal, and also a place of learning and education about how to protect the things that really matter to people and how to design communities that are compatible with wilderness and wild lands. And that, I think, is really going to be the hope for our future, making sure that there is a pool of students available who are familiar with what it takes to protect the world from climate change, to maintain ecological balance, and to protect wilderness areas into the future as something that is both precious and very rare.
That's great. I love it because we've talked about some pretty heavy issues today, but this is a really positive one. So it sounds great. As you stated, the Adirondack Council is not for profit. How can people support you?
There are a variety of ways. As a not-for-profit organization, we could always use a little money, but we also need help. The organization really does most of its work by building momentum about issues that are important to a lot of different people. And we need, because we can't go out and make a contribution to a political campaign or support a candidate, what we need to do is educate the public about what is happening in the Adirondacks, how they can participate in keeping the place clean and green, and really give them the tools to communicate with the people they need to communicate about these things. So we are very much in need of folks who can call or write an email to their legislator, people that want to host a gathering in the Adirondacks to get supporters involved in environmental protection. All of these things help. Certainly, we have some tools at our disposal, such as an activist manual and some opportunities for people to participate with the organization as citizens, that if you go to our website, you'll see a take action button right on the main page, and usually 2 or 3 things active at the time that people can help out on. I know the State Wildlife Action Plan is one that we're working on right now. The road salt task force is something that we're trying to build support for. So both of those are displayed on the website. People can go there to find out more about what's being done, see how they might be able to help, or lend their assistance in some material way to a project that also catches their attention.
That's great. I think sometimes we hear these things going on and you feel helpless, but just simply calling your representative at the state or federal or even local level makes a huge difference. Because people don't call, they don't write because they don't think it's going to matter, but it actually does. They monitor how many calls they're getting on certain topics. I mean, there's a science behind it. And if there's enough voices, they definitely will pay attention. So I saw that your activist guide on your website, and I actually am taking a look at it too because I'm a big I love to write a good email, but it does really matter. This has been so great, John. I mean, we could probably talk about this for hours and hours. There's so much great information that you shared, and so many important and critical tasks to be accomplished. And I think you've given us a really great overview. So we really appreciate that. Just, really quickly, what was your first experience with the Adirondacks? Are you from here originally, or how did you come to this? Because you've been with the Adirondack Council for, I think, 20 or 30 years. Do I have that right?
35 now, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I was when Gary Randorf came to see if I'd be interested in working with the organization. I was the managing editor of the Malone Evening Telegram.
Oh, wow.
Well, that should be an interesting title because it's not called that anymore. There are no evening newspapers in the whole world. And just having it be named a telegram dates it as a
right.
19th century relic to begin with, right? So I remember when I first walked in there, they were still using the old linotype machine. Now, this is an 1870s built machine that used hot lead type to set pages and had a leather belt driving it. So it's barely electrified, but they're still using it to put out the the mailing labels at that place when I first got there. So it was an interesting transition into the legacy of putting out a newspaper in a small town, but it was a lot of fun and something that I really enjoyed doing. My first job, though, involved in the Adirondacks, was driving a bakery truck all the way up Route 9N into Westport every day and stopping at every little diner and resort along the way. I had the keys to, I think, half a dozen general stores and places that were not open at 3 o'clock in the morning when I was dropping off their baked goods for the day, but would be open in a couple hours after I'd left. But that was a midnight to 9 a.m. job, and I didn't get to see as much of the park as I wanted to because it was dark during the first half of the shift. But by about 6 or 6:30, it was usually light enough to start seeing what the landscape looked like. And I got a pretty good chance to see the park without a whole lot of people in the way. So that was a nice experience as a youngster. It's a little tough staying awake at 10 o'clock in the morning as the van got hot. Coming back down the Northway, but that was a lot of fun and a job that helped me through a university at Albany education.
That's great. Is there a specific lake or trail or place in the Adirondack that never fails to inspire you?
I love Minerva. It's probably the poorest town in the Adirondacks, but it's a place that's both wild and beautiful and has some family connections, especially over in Irishtown, both with my family and my wife's family, especially my wife's family. And my wife's family also is long time residents of the Great Sacandaga Lake area, where their family were Cathans, or Cathans, I should say, and Rockwells. And the waterfall in Hadley is named after one of them, and the road down at Stewart's Pond is named after the other. So they'd been there for a while. They got thrown out of the lake valley when the lake was created. They were on the river as farmers and pushed up on the top of the hill in 1930 when the dam was built to create the Great Sacandaga Lake and prevent flooding in Albany and Troy. But it is still a beautiful spot. It's very different than it was 100 years ago, but it's a place that we really enjoy going back to.
If we gave you a magic wand and you could fix one thing in the park tomorrow, what would it be? That's a tough one.
That is a tough one. Well, I think I'd probably do something to level off the temperature.
Yeah.
Slowing down changes to the climate are the things that will leave the park the least damaged long term over the next several decades. And I'm hoping that the damage that can be done by storms and by long term changes in temperature will slowly come to a halt, but that's not encouraging given what is happening at the federal level right now. I'm more hopeful that the state is paying attention to what's going on and trying to take action. And I'm seeing some progress in that regard. But I think we need a reversal of course on federal policy for that to happen anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, John, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We end every episode of our podcast by asking our guests to tell us about their favorite hidden gem. You've already shared a couple with us, but it can be anything. It can be a diner, it can be a hiking trail, it can be a museum. If somebody was to ask you, what's the one place I have to visit in the Adirondacks? What would you say?
Wow. That's probably the hardest question you've asked me today. There's so many wonderful thoughts. I'd say it would be Ireland Lie. It's a beautiful little wetland and lake complex way out on the edge of the park, the southeastern corner. But it's also the water supply, essentially, that begins the Glen Wild project that provides all of Amsterdam's drinking water.
Wow.
So that's well protected inside the park, and a place that used to be a favorite haunt of Sir William Johnson, fellow who was essentially governor of the state under the British prior to the French and Indian War. His favorite fishing spot was up here in the fish house and not so far away.
That is a brand new one to us. So thank you for sharing that. So thank you so much for your time with us, John. This has been a lot of fun.
I've been caught and released. Awesome.
Yeah.
Right. Caught and released. Exactly.
Glad to use the barbel hook.
Wow. I learned a lot about what's happening in the Adirondacks from this podcast in terms of environment and climate change and things like that. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't even get into the land stewardship programs that they have, like for the forest management and farming and Champlain Valley. And, I don't know if you saw the program they have for lakeside residences in the park and the
definitely
systems. And that's the whole, I mean, we could spend a whole other day.
Yeah. We'll definitely need to have them back. Yeah.
Particularly the stewardship. I think that's the most interesting to me.
And I also think it's, he tied the impact of, what's happening, whether it be road salt or, the air pollution to some very practical things, the salt in your groundwater is going to destroy your washing machine and the appliances in your house that use salt, or the corrosive effect of salt on bridges, and those things. And, I think people sometimes, look at these issues, at a very high level and don't think about the real practical things that impact our lives. So that was great. We are recording this just after the 4th of July. Had a lovely weekend here in the Adirondacks. Lots of great fun things to do. Fireworks. The rain held off for most of the weekend. It was nice, really nice. And summer is definitely in full swing here. So if you're looking for things to do, head on over to adktaste.com. We have our whole events section, as well as great recommendations for places to eat, shop, places to stay, and fun stuff to do. And while you're there, why don't you sign up for our newsletter? And then you'll get those recommendations delivered right to your inbox. So, listener, thank you for tuning in to ADK Talks. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps others to discover great insights and intel about the Adirondacks. So until next time,
keep those emails coming.
Yes, keep those emails coming. We got great reaction to our recent episode where we answered your questions and getting a lot more really good questions. We're going to have to do another one of those mailbag episodes, I think, Steve.
Cool.
Awesome. Okay. Have a great time in the Adirondacks, and we'll talk to you again real soon. Bye-bye.